and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Hello. We're at a place called Vertigo. You're back with Irreverent, and today your hosts, me, Jamie Franklin, and Daniel French. Daniel, you've been away for ages. I'm sure people have been looking forward to your return, to your resurrection, to your recidivism. Is that the right word? I don't know.
Steady on.
Can't think of different words for return. Anyway, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing fine actually. We had a good break. We went up to Aberdeen to participate in the wedding of our goddaughter. Then took a ferry to Europe.
Wow.
I know we're all in Europe, but you know what I mean. Onto the mainland Europe.
We know exactly what you mean. You took a ferry from UK to Europe. Yeah.
Our first stop was an intriguing place, not one I'd necessarily returned to. It was Amsterdam. A bit of a tragic place there, really. In fact, the hotel that we stayed in, beautiful, brand new hotel. We had no idea of this until we arrived. Was that it was a converted presbytery next to a contemporary. Get this, a contemporary church that was now been deconsecrated because of population shift.
Right.
Next door to the church, they're building a mosque. And what was tragic was that as the builders were while we were there, were taking stuff out the church, the altar was basically just left on the street, smashed up.
That is
I mean, my wife and I were saying, gosh, if we had a van, we'd put the altar in the van.
Yeah.
Take it. I mean, the ferry company might have something to say, but you had this sort of feeling.
Yeah.
I really want to sort of chip a bit of this off and take it and preserve it. But it was a really sort of powerful symbol of where we are. And we went through you see the city. It's got its. I don't have a very good sense of smell, so I've never really quite got the smell of cannabis, but even my poor sense of smell was overwhelmed by this sickly smell, and and for all these sort of promise of paradise. I can remember getting onto the tube, and there's a huge notice saying, in this city, 1 in 5 teenagers have suicidal thoughts. Boom, boom.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this isn't exactly the paradise that was promised. We
That's
then went
probably
on
because they're all smoking weed, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I hate it. I mean, I really, really have a passionate dislike of weed, marijuana, drugs, and what have you. We went on to Brussels. I grew up in Brussels for about 3 years, so it was really sweet to go back. I haven't been back for 40-odd years, 45 years.
The home of technocracy.
Yeah, the home of technocracy. Apparently, where we lived was about a mile away from where Boris Johnson also went to primary school. So
Really?
we must have passed each other.
I realised he went to school in Brussels.
Yeah. Dad's a big Europhile, isn't he? Word for the commission and all sorts.
Stanley Johnson.
Stanley Johnson. Oh.
Yeah.
Then went to Bruges for a few days.
Oh, lovely. Bruges is lovely.
Absolutely, Bruges. Went to see in the centre there is the sort of shrine church to a miraculous relic. Apologies to those who aren't into relics, but it was quite something to see. That's sort of supposed to be a handkerchief with the blood of Christ taken by Joseph of Arimathea, and it has a long kind of patrimony in the town's history. And aside from the one-way driving scheme, which drove me absolutely nuts, Bruges was really lovely. And then we took a very long drive to an Airbnb. We'd gone to La Rochelle. Now, La Rochelle was glorious, very civilized. Come back quite relaxed. And,
good. I'm pleased. The weekend,
and here we are in 30 odd degrees.
I know. Well, there's a climate change. It's so annoying, isn't it? Giving us these beautiful sunny days in early September. What's all this about? Hey, Daniel, I went to the March for Life the
I
weekend.
know you did, yeah.
And I saw a number of podcast listeners, which was really, really encouraging, because you just make the podcast and you're going to put it out there, and you see numbers of people listening, but you don't actually meet people. And actually meeting people who listen, it really is. It's very humbling just to think that anyone listens to this show.
It was good numbers, wasn't it? From what they've said, that they had about 7,000
March for Life. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I thought
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it seemed like there were lots of people there. But anyway, we'll talk about a little bit of, in detail later. But just to say, big shout out to those people I met.
Yeah. Can I give a shout out to Tom Harvey? Tom and Kelly. I conducted their wedding over the weekend. Tom is a local fisherman.
Nice.
And is a massive Irreverent fan.
Great.
As made his mother is now a massive Irreverent fan. Amazing. And he goes around talking about it. So, this is a fisherman who's doing something really beneficial for us, for what we're trying to do. And he loves it. And his mother told me during the wedding reception that, since lockdowns and everything over the last few years, since sort of tuning in a bit more to what the Spirit is saying, he's changed. So Tom, well, shout out to you. And I think my message, as I said at the homily, don't worry if you feel like jelly. Simon Peter felt like jelly a lot of the time. Be a rock.
Awesome. Love it. Well, yes. What's his name again? Did you say?
Tom Harvey.
Tom Harvey, you're a legend, Tom. Thank you very much for promoting the show. We really appreciate it. And congratulations on your wedding, your marriage, and prayers for your first year. Hope it goes really well. Hey, Daniel, I just got a few just quick notices, not to bore anyone, but just a few things to update people on. So the church search is, I've got lots of churches to put up. So apologies if your church hasn't gone up yet. It just takes a bit of time. If you'd like to find a church to go to, you're thinking, I'd like to be a Christian, or I'd like to go to church, go to our website, reverendpod.com, and you can find our church finder in the top right-hand corner. And there we put a handy little map up, and people recommend churches that people might like who listen to this podcast. So you can do that. And you can also put your church on there by just finding the form and filling that in. So those do go up. Just takes a bit of time, but we've got lots up there now. We've got some across the world as well, which is quite exciting. Quite a few in America. I
noticed we had some questions about, are there any churches in the sort of Somerset area that people would recommend? So if you are, as a listener from that part of the Southwest, and you go to a church that you want to give the thumbs up to, do go onto the website and log that in.
Yeah, and also that reminds me, actually, anywhere in East Anglia, in sort of Suffolk, around Norwich area, there's not very much there. So if anyone's got churches around that area, please do go there and fill out the form, which is in the same place in the website. Good shout, Daniel. We haven't plugged our merchandise for ages, so I'm wearing the Irreverent hat today, and I've got the Irreverent mug. And we've also got Reverend T-shirts as well, 2 different types of T-shirts, one with Dick Dellingpole's amazing drawings of us, and then one with the incredible logo and so on. So if you want to get your Irreverent merch, please do go to the website, and it's all on there. You just click on merch and you can buy some stuff. That really helps us, and also you can have the merch, which is obviously what it's really about. And then the final thing I just wanted to plug, just in case anyone's interested, because I don't really like sharing on Twitter, to be honest with you, because it's more of a sort of personal thing to me, and I think it would be the kind of thing that listeners to the show would be more interested than me just putting it out there on Twitter. Is my Substack, which is called Good Things, and it's just me sort of sharing good things that in my life, books I read, experiences I have, that kind of stuff. Just trying to stay positive, really, and to fill my mind with edifying thoughts by writing about them. So it's jamiefranklin.substack.com. There is a small paywall to get the whole thing. I release a lot of it free, but there's a small paywall for the whole thing. It just really helps me because I rely on the income I make from online stuff and to live. So if you want to follow my Substack, please do, jamiefranklin.substack.com. Go and subscribe to Good Things. Now, Daniel, last week I found the episode quite depressing, and a number of people did said the same thing. So we're going to try and have a more encouraging episode this week. And there are reasons this to be encouraged. This isn't a sort of fake or artificial thing. So I've got a few emails that I'd like to read throughout the show, just to sort of make people, see the good stuff and recognize that there are good things going on. So I'll start with this one to begin with, from Jane. Dear Jamie, Tom and Daniel, like many people, I've changed in recent years. Thanks in part to you and Irreverend. I've found faith and was baptized into the Catholic Church at Easter this year. About a month ago, my priest came to me and said that a young man had approached him as he was as he was baptized as a baby into the Church of England, but was interested in becoming Catholic. Father Michael asked if I suppose that should say, if I could talk to him as a person who had recently come into the Catholic Church and share my experience. Then 2 weeks ago, a new person appeared in the pew in front of me, another young man. I said hello afterwards, and he explained that he recently decided to become Christian, and through his interest in and study of history, had concluded that the Catholic Church was where he belonged. I don't know if he's approached our preach yet. These men are in their 20s or 30s. It strikes me that they don't really tie in with the C of E view that the church needs to be more relevant, does it? Best wishes and thanks as always. No, it doesn't, but it's fantastic to hear that. It's really good.
When I was in La Rochelle, we went on Sunday to the cathedral, Sunday Mass, all in French. And what was interesting in La Rochelle on the Sunday Mass was looking around, something that I hadn't really seen before, particularly in the Catholic Church, but I'm seeing it from place to place, and I'm sure you're seeing it too, is what I would call serious young men, serious young women in church, very dressed differently, smart suits, rosaries, kneeling, responding well, looking attentive, and they're doing a head count. It's about 200 in the congregation. It's a stiflingly hot day, and I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there's about a dozen of these characters. And it reminded me a bit of like the sort of people that go to a sort of Jordan Peterson rally, and he says, wear a 3-piece suit and smart shoes and, make yourself. And I thought, is this becoming a sort of badge, really, that a sort of return to Sunday best, that these people are not only tidying their room, tidying their soul, they're tidying themselves as they present themselves to worship. Now, I'm not making a big deal. Christianity isn't about what you dress, but it certainly, I thought, in this sort of post-modern world, maybe that's, if you want to be against the culture, that's how you present yourself. You come to church looking like you mean business. And I saw the same in Bruges. And I thought, I've never seen this before. Perhaps this is something that is, as a phenomenon, is happening all over the place. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I've seen that even in my context, somewhat. And I think, I think back to that video, Jordan Peterson with the churches, his message to the churches and how young men are just sort of told by this culture to essentially be what they're not and what all their instincts tell them they're not. Oh no, I was just saying, that it's the Jordan Peterson thing. I think it's kind of saying that the young men are being told by our culture not to do and not to be what they really are and what their instincts tell them that they are and what their instincts tell them to do. And what we can do as churches is we can appeal to those instincts, and part of those instincts, I think, is they are to do with creating order, rising to challenges, being stretched, learning new things, that kind of stuff that he talks about. So I definitely see that, and I think. Do
you not feel there's a kind of aesthetic with it as well? That I noticed this at NatCon, that people under the age of 30 who were there, who James Orr says was about 40%, dressed in a similar serious way, and had a kind of. Their conversations were high cultured in an unpretentious way, which is not always the way that things can happen that way. But these were folks who were not necessarily on the high end of pay, or in the best of economic circumstances. From what I could work out, they were sort of early career types, and they hadn't come necessarily from well-heeled families, but they presented well, and they were all generally people of faith, and just their interests in terms of food, wine, music, clothing had a particular take.
Right.
And I thought, how interesting! This is kind of like the new punk.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying. I suppose the slight sort of caution I have about it is that we don't, if we sort of frame it as a sort of movement within culture, then movements within culture are transitory, aren't they? So they will inevitably change and move on. And I think, I don't know what the best way of thinking about it is, but I suppose the best way of thinking about it is we want to appeal to we want to use the opportunity that we have now, the sort of the temporary opportunity that we have now to connect people to something which is of eternal and infinite value. And if it were a different time, we might have to do it in a different way. But I think particularly calling young men to something above themselves, something kind of aspirational, that is actually pretty unique in this culture, where men are being told that they are aggressive, misogynist rapists, and that that if they desire to get married and have children and raise a family, then they are sort of necessarily patriarchal and oppressive and blah 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 and all the rest of it. We want to take advantage of this by calling it out for the nonsense that it actually is, and offering them a real challenge, a real life as a man, and what that actually means. So
and maybe one advantage of it for us is, and for our listeners, is that this potentially gives us the ability to spot each other as well in cathedrals and churches. If you're looking out for other serious, small O Orthodox Christians, or those who are coming new to faith, or potential people on that journey, that there is a way that those people sort of carry themselves. And I just thought that was fun in La Rochelle. I'm sitting there doing a head count, thinking, oh well, this is interesting. Yep.
Well, I've definitely seen it. I've definitely seen it here, and I think it's obviously true in other countries as well. And you can see it, I think, particularly in the traditional Latin Mass. We just need to carry on with this, Daniel, because this is it's clearly the case that we have an opportunity. We'll talk about this later, obviously.
Yeah, maybe what we need is irreverent merch cufflinks.
Yeah, maybe with a little kind of IR or something. But I mean, what I was going to say is that we'll talk about it later, because I'm interested in your thoughts on the Time survey thing. But the difficult thing is that there's a counterculturalism that exists both in society and in the church as well. So we have to stick to our guns, because we're receiving pressure not only from the culture. In fact, it's not so bad receiving pressure from the culture. Who cares? That's to be expected. It's when it's coming from inside the church as well. And the same, the church is amplifying the poisonous toxin that's coming from the culture, and implying that, like, this is the way to do ministry and this is what you need to buy into. What we need to do is we need to remain faithful, and then as the Lord blesses our ministries, make it clear to the world and to the rest of the church that God blesses faithfulness, and he doesn't bless unfaithfulness and capitulation to the culture. I don't know whether you heard, we haven't talked about it, I'm sure you didn't hear it, but I was interviewed for the Sunday program on Radio 4 this week.
Oh no, I haven't heard that. I heard some other ones.
I mean, honestly, Daniel, the program is crazy, because it's entitled like the faith lives of sex workers or something like that. Anyway, my bit is just at the beginning. It's about the Time survey. I mean, where do they come up with these ideas? My bit's about the Time survey, and they got a bunch of talking heads like clergy, and I just did a 5-minute interview, and they cut it into a little bit which is interspersed with these other clergy. But I'm pretty much the only one saying that we need to just be faithful to what's been delivered to us, and to repeat it in this generation, to pass it on to the next generation, without capitulating to the culture and changing. But everyone else is saying, well, the culture is reflective of Christian values. We just need to go with the culture, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like we're a lone voice, but I can't see it any other way, Daniel, because to me, capitulation is just death. I am not capitulating to this culture. To me, all the signs are that this culture is completely post-Christian in major areas, to do with family, to do with human sexuality, to do with our understanding of what humanity is. And you can see it manifested in so many obvious ways. But just to refer to this thing about masculinity, you could apply it to this area as well, to the complete sort of breakdown of any kind of conception of what it means to be a man, to be a godly man, or to be a responsible man. We've completely lost that sense. And I think when you do say to young men, like you can see with Jordan Peterson, albeit in a sort of less obviously Christian way, but when you do say to them, no, you're called to take responsibility for certain things in your life, and that responsibility is going to fulfill you, and that's going to make you what you're supposed to be, men will respond to that. They definitely will. So we just need to keep saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't but win in that, and the culture is only really at the beginnings of its own machinations. And as I mentioned to you earlier on, in that billboard in Amsterdam, 1 in 5 teenagers are now having suicidal thoughts in supposed paradise.
Yep. Yeah, and it's the same thing in our culture, isn't it? I mean, obviously, we've got different kind of hot button issues here, but I mean, there is obviously overlap. But it's a similar thing in our culture. This is meant to be the free, liberal, late modern capitalist utopia, which is delivered to us all happiness and freedom and so on. And yet, why are people so utterly miserable and lost? And we're going to talk about that, aren't we? We're not. I don't know whether we should call it twits on Twitter anymore, because people started getting upset about that. But we've got an extraordinary clip from Twitter we're going to air later, just for a bit of fun. But Daniel, let's do a bit of Bible, shall we? We'll just carry on with the Acts of the Apostles. This is just a few verses we're going to read. But let's say the Lord's Prayer together. And so I got an email this week criticizing me for saying, let's do a prayer. Not allowed to say that anymore. So apologies for saying that. I just thought it was a kind of humorous way of introducing prayer, but I'm not allowed to say that anymore. So let's say a prayer. Let us pray the Lord's Prayer together. So I'll pray this, and you can do a prayer at the end, Daniel, because you always do that really well. So let's do let's say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So, just continuing, with the Acts of the Apostles. So we're in chapter 1, verse 12. So Jesus has just gone up to heaven in the ascension, and he's promised the Holy Spirit to come upon the apostles and the church, the early church. So immediately after that, then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey away. And when they had entered, they went up to the upper room where they were staying, Peter and John and James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus and Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James. All these with one accord were devoting themselves to prayer, together with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. So there we are. It's interesting, isn't it? This thing about us. This is kind of a sort of side point. But when it says a Sabbath day's journey away, that's an interesting exegetical point, isn't it? I wonder what's the difference between a Sabbath day's journey and just a normal day's journey. Does it mean, I don't know, because I thought you weren't supposed to do any journeys on the Sabbath. It's interesting, isn't it? Write in if you've got an answer.
That'd be worth looking into. Is that a slower pace of?
Yeah, maybe. It's interesting. I've only just noticed that. Anyway, I suppose the thing that sort of stood out to me here, and it comes up over and over again in the book of Acts, isn't it? Is the way that when the early church gathers, they're always devoting themselves to prayer, and how this is a mark of what they do. They they seek God and they pray for God's guidance, and the whole thing is extremely charismatic. And of course, at this moment as well, the context is Jesus is gone. What do? We're very beleaguered. We're waiting for the coming of the Holy Spirit. Well, we have to pray, and it just seemed to me in a very simple way that's a word from the Lord for us today, isn't it? When we're talking about these kind of things, we mustn't neglect the life of prayer, and we mustn't neglect to ask the Lord to pour out His Spirit upon the church and to bring the church back to life. It does. I did feel pretty depressed last week after the episode, I have to say. I mean,
they didn't go away and go to a room with a flip chart.
Yeah, no, they didn't. Did they? Yeah.
They didn't run away. They went back to the center of where the worst had happened. They go back to Jerusalem when they could easily have run to the hills. So I find that extraordinary. And as we know, they are there for 10 days. We note that for listeners who aren't aware, the church notes that in the church's liturgy from the Feast of the Ascension to Pentecost Sunday. There are 10 days that are marked in the church's calendar.
Is it 10 days or is it 9 days? Because it's a novena. It's a novena, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. It depends which days you count, I suppose. Sorry, I'm being pedantic.
We're back to the Sabbath. When does it start? Yeah. That sort of quiet gathering is quite profound, actually, isn't it? I've often joked to my own congregation that maybe the best thing we could do to grow and flourish is if I had a lock in. I ordered the sidesman to lock us all in, and for food to be delivered, and we just sat here for 9 days, 10 days, and prayed it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I suppose what I was sort of driving at is that I think we have to be realistic about what's going on in the church, but at the same time, we mustn't approach it from we must always approach it from a perspective of faith, and that's what prayer helps us to do. It helps us to turn our hearts and our minds towards God and to petition God to change the situation that we're living with. And that's what I feel in the Church of England, that it's just a time when we have to trust and we have to be faithful. I don't know what's coming next. And, we see these things happening, sort of coming at us left and right. But it is a time when we have to trust and know that God will reveal the way one way or another eventually. So anyway, Daniel, speaking of that, I think maybe instead of doing let's do Twitter on Twitter after we've talked about the sort of church stuff, shall we? So why don't we go? Let's do another encouragement. Keep our spirits up, and then we'll get your comments on the time survey. And we'll talk a bit about the sort of March for Life controversy after that. Okay. So this is just a part of an email someone sent me. So I'll just read this out. I wanted to end on a note of encouragement. Reverend Daniel, you were quite right in your piece in The Spectator in early March about millennials flocking to BTP and traditional services. The same is true at the other end of the spectrum. Here in Oxford, St Ebbs and St Aldate are getting 300 to 400 under 30-year-olds every Sunday evening. So those are evangelical churches. And Pusey House is attracting increasing numbers of families with children as well as students. The wishy-washy, middle-of-the-road parishes get very few. There is an appetite for religion amongst my Gen Zs. My fellow Gen Zs, amongst my Gen Zs, but these want something they can sink their teeth into, literally, if they're good sacramental Anglo-Catholics. It gives me great hope for the future that the generations who are coming through university and their 20s and beginning to settle down and have families are far more likely to engage with churches that really offer them something to think about and which challenge them. Truthfully, none of them want a Vicar of Dibley-esque experience of tea and cakes, which tries to paper over the difficulties of life. They want something that engages with those difficulties head on and gives them meaningful answers that they can pursue, study, and work on. So there we go. That's a little snapshot of life in Oxford. Oh, by the way, just for anyone who's listening and who might like to attend, I'm going to Pusey House. I'm going to preach on All Saints' Day in Pusey House, which is on the 1st of November. On the evening of 1st of November. So please do come along if you'd like to. Be good to meet you. But yes, Pusey House is a great place. But yeah,
perhaps you should stick a pin in for Pusey House.
Yeah,
on
we
the
could
map.
do. Yeah, well, someone has to do it. Yeah, or I suppose we could do it. But anyway, good email, and that very much summarizes what we were kind of saying. It gives Oxford as a good example, but you could sort of multiply that, albeit in different ways, in many big cities.
I think that a generation or so ago, the normative would have been for students to go to university chaplaincies.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
particularly in Oxford.
Exactly. To be
yeah.
part of chapel services. I'm not sure if the energy is there anymore.
No.
And if I were going to, if I was seeking to have a ministry with a student population nowadays, I wouldn't take the route that I might have took even 10 years ago and said, I'll become a university chaplain. In fact, I've done that. I've done that in Aberdeen. I would say, look, I'm going to look for a church near a university where one of those, none of the churches are really engaged with the population, and set up shop there so that I'm outside all the sort of red tape, political correctness, that now being a chaplain involved in even if you didn't believe in it, I think actually operating within a university setting is pretty hair raising.
Oh yeah, it's stultifying for sure. But Daniel, let's get your comments on the time survey thing, because we didn't hear from you last week. Now, I don't think we should go into this in detail because we don't want to get sort of bogged down in it. But for anyone who didn't listen to it, it's basically this survey of vicars in the Church of England that the Times took out. There were only just over 1,000 respondents, really. So, and it showed, that there were 2/3 in favour of gay marriage in church. What else was it? It was saying about how the option for traditionalist Anglo-Catholics to have alternate episcopal oversight in terms of having male bishops should be removed. And it just generally kind of showed a sort of liberalising fervour within, to the sort of, let's say, sort of 2/3 majority of the clergy. Oh, yeah, apparently most of the clergy voted for Brexit as well, which is not a big surprise. You didn't need a survey to tell you that. But what was your sort of feeling about it, Daniel? How did you respond?
Do you mean most of the clergy voted Remain?
Oh yeah, sorry, pardon me.
Yeah, whereas most of the congregations.
I should have said against Brexit. Sorry, pardon me. Yeah.
The bit that really sort of got me was the number of clergy. And I know Ian Paul said this whole thing about, it's a self-selecting survey, so we've got to be careful about what we're actually seeing here. But the sheer number of clergy who've considered throwing the towel in.
Oh yeah, because they're all knackered, and
and the similar number of clergy who are doubting that their church will be open in 10 years' time. That struck me as congruent to anecdotal experience of particularly progressive liberal clergy who have lost the fire and are resigned, in a sense, to the liberal project failing. I think Richard Coles said something along this line last year on going back to being a writer, and he hasn't resigned his orders, but he's not acting as a vicar anymore.
I don't think he's got permission to officiate.
Has he not? Well,
I don't think he's asked.
Oh,
I might be wrong about that.
The only churches that are growing are traditional conservative churches, and he lamented that.
Oh, did he actually say that?
And I thought, well, at least that's honest, isn't it? Because that's actually statistically Daniel, quite true.
Can I clarify what you're saying? So it's an interesting thought. So what you're saying is that this sort of burnout amongst the kind of progressive liberals is a kind of, in effect, it is an admission that this approach to church and church growth and so on just doesn't work, and so they can't. Or is it though, Daniel? I mean, just to push back slightly, because I think probably what they'd say is, no, what we need backing from our bishops, and if the bishops were to actually go ahead and go forward with gay marriage in the church, then we would start to see the culture being more accepting and coming in, and I wouldn't have to justify myself, I wouldn't have to justify these bigoted opinions and so on and so forth. Wouldn't they just say that?
I think there might be a strand who said that, but I think there's another strand who have just given up the ghost really on ministry, because if it's essentially social work with a veneer of spirituality, it's so imminent, and that there is they're not orientating themselves primarily to the transcendent of God and the truths of the scripture and so on. Eventually it just becomes a job, and jobs run out of steam. You have to put up with annoying people and hierarchies that aren't running your revolution as fast as you want to. You have to put up with all the red tape that's thrown at the church. And if you haven't got the altar of God in your complete vision all the time, if that isn't the priority and the prayer and the sacrifice and the supernatural, I suppose I'm saying if your life isn't one which at least aspires to be Eucharistic in the wider sense of the word, you're for hiding for nothing. I'm terribly sorry, and I some years ago, I remember I had a couple of priests who confided in me that they were both quite noted liberals. They were coming out to retirement, and they weren't going to, after retirement, seek permission to officiate. They weren't going to go to church anymore, Jamie, because they'd run out of steam. They're not sure whether they believed in it. And it's a bit like Richard Holloway, he was the Bishop of Edinburgh, who's sort of journeyed so far off the edge that he's now post-Christian,
right?
And sees Christianity as toxic, and so on. And I heard those things. I just hit 40, and when those two priests, within weeks of each other, said what they said, I thought, crikey, why am I not feeling like that? And after a few hours of self-examination, I realized that I don't think I'm going to be like that, because I believe in it. I believe in God. I believe in his miraculous presence. I don't believe in the myth of progress. I believe that we are moving towards judgment, and so on and so on. And this book has authority over my life. And you can throw what you like at me. I'm not saying I won't buckle and bruise at times, but I'm pretty dogged on the whole thing, that I'm going to continue to be a nuisance.
Yeah. Well, you'll get worn out, won't you? I mean, you've said that a lot more eloquently than I tried to say a similar thing last week. You've said it a lot more eloquently, but yeah, absolutely. It's like you don't have any fuel in your tank. You can't keep going forever. You need faith to do this job. I mean, fundamentally, don't you? In a sense, like, it's a truism, isn't it? If you were trying to do anything in life, if you've got a product that you're trying to sell, you have to believe in it. If you're going to give your life for it and you don't believe in it, then how are you going to do it? You can't keep doing it. You can't keep faking it. You need the passion that's actually there.
It needs to kind of, you'd have what these apostles did. You'd be in that upper room,
sustained through a life of prayer. Yeah.
I hope and pray that altar down the road there, half a mile down the road, that that or whatever other altar I'm given, I'm going to be at. And I'll be at that altar if there's just one person there. I'm going to be there presiding over that Eucharist, whether it's in good season and full, or whether it's down to one, because quite frankly, it's the most wonderful, glorious thing, the greatest privilege, and it feeds me. I long every day. I'm impatient. I wish I could put the Eucharist on every day. I wish I could worship in groups every day, but sometimes it's not logistically possible. But you're gonna any bishop or archdeacon who tries to conclude my ministry before I sense that it is concluded is going to have to drag me fingernails off from that altar.
Yeah. Well, I think that's well said, Daniel. I think it's well said. And yeah, we talked about that survey a lot. So I think that's a great perspective, that we need to approach these things with faith and the ministry and the Christian life in general. Can we move on to talk about the March for Life and the sort of Twitter controversy that surrounds it, which I saw you'd embroiled yourself in. Even when you were away on holiday, Daniel, I noticed you were still stirring the pot on Twitter in various different ways.
At the end, after the lot, when I got to La Rochelle, I took it off my phone. I thought I've got to just not.
You've got to have a bit of a break. Yeah,
I've got to not look at this stuff because
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
I know that many in the Church of England keep giving us opportunity to comment.
Yeah, of course.
But we all need a break from it.
We do. We need to make these things work for us and not the other way around. So the March for Life happened on Saturday. It started at the Emmanuel Centre. I'd never really been before. I know what it's like now, and so I've got a good idea for future years how we might like do more of a kind of official Reverend meetup or something. But it was really good to be there. There were clearly thousands of people there. It was interesting because Antifa had organised a counter protest, and I'm very naive about these.
Really?
I came out of the centre, and there were these masked people. They were mostly in masks. I mean, like surgical masks, and some of them had those kind of Antifa bandanas kind of wrapped around their faces, but most of them were just in masks, screaming and shouting, and they were. We'll talk about the Twitter thing in a minute, but I mean, they were off the scale in terms of aggression compared to what was going on with the March for Life, which was entirely peaceful. It was mostly there were lots and lots of Roman Catholics there. So the marching, the main thing that I heard were hymns, lots of Marian hymns, people praying the Rosary and saying Hail Marys and stuff like that. The Antifa protesters, there was one group behind us that kind of marched behind us, and then there was another group which looked like they'd been kind of positioned in Parliament Square, which is where the march was supposed to end up. So they'd obviously sort of planned it that way. It was almost like a kind of pincer movement. At one stage,
that's crazy. I'm sorry. That's crazy. I mean, what's Antifa going to do next? Blockade the Mothers Union.
Yeah.
And they surround the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, lots of them had signs. There was one sign which a lot of them had, which said abortion as early as possible, as late as necessary, I think it said. And I mean, if you actually think about what that means, that is just straight out advocating for the murder of children. I think there's the sensitive language that one has to use when we're talking about that kind of that tricky pastoral area of early crisis pregnancies. But when you're saying things like as late as necessary, that could literally mean the destruction of a 40-week-old child. So that's just advocating child murder. There's no ambiguity about that. So yeah, really, really horrible. And when we walked past them, I mean, look, I did stand face to face with them because I was not going to allow them to think that I was intimidated by them. I had a sign which said "My bodily autonomy began in the womb," and I held it and pointed it to them, and I told them to read it over and over again. And at one stage, there were these four women. There was kind of I think they were on Parliament Square, and we were kind of separated by a kind of shrubbery or something, but we were quite close. And I was just standing there holding the sign, pointing to it. And they were going absolutely mental, absolutely nuts. And one of them was really, I mean, they were just screaming like obscenities, like blasphemous obscenities. And, I see the image of God in these people, and I believe that they can be redeemed by Christ. But really what I was thinking is like, this is a manifestation of demonic power in human life here, because these people are screaming blasphemies and obscenities at me because I'm suggesting that children in the womb should have their lives respected and protected. And that's the thing. That has animated them to spend their Saturday afternoon dressing up in dresses which are stained with blood, masking themselves, making these signs, advocating for these things, and then coming out there and showering peaceful protesters with abuse and obscenities. that's a demonic spirit that's animating these people. And as I say, like the Christian attitude is not to condemn them. It's to recognize God's grace in our own lives and to pray for them that they will come to a place of repentance. But it is nothing less than that. It's not an issue that we can just say, oh well, this is just different points of view or whatever. They're not just different points of view. There's a point of view which comes from knowing Christ and knowing the light and recognizing what human beings really are, which is that we're sacred. And there's a darkness which advocates for this practice. And the ideology that goes with it. And
this is why the cultural war is actually really a spiritual war, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that in the end, it is about the human person and what is a human being.
Yeah.
And are we just stuff? Are we meat Lego, to quote Mary Harrington, or are we made in the image of God?
Exactly.
And it's basically that, and this is a new battle in many ways for us, or it's a different version maybe of an old battle, but it's certainly down to this: what does it mean to be a human person, a human being?
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I would say about it, I've been thinking about this since my interview with Patrick Deneen, is that this thing, I don't mind it if people want to use like rights language and that kind of stuff, but I don't think rights language is the strongest language that you can use in this scenario. I think talking about the sacredness of life is the most important thing to say, because the problem is when you use rights language, it's like you get into a kind of tit for tat argument about, well, it's the right of the child versus the right of the woman, and so it's like, well, whose rights are going to come out, and obviously that opens the door for people to say, well, women's rights should be preferred to the rights of the child and so on. And though, of course, I wouldn't agree with that argument, nevertheless, it does make it possible. But if you insist on the sacredness of all life, that changes the framing of the argument, because you can't then say, well, a woman's right to kill is above the sacredness of life, because sacredness of life is something that can't be trumped by rights language or language around choice or something like that. So I think that kind of language is really important to just insist upon. The child in the womb is a human being, and it is sacred. Humanity is sacred. The image of God in humanity is sacred, and it must be protected, particularly when it's vulnerable. And you would agree, you liberals and you progressives, you would agree on that when you're talking about people who are marginalized in other areas in society. So why won't you agree on it when we're talking about the most vulnerable, the most in need of protection, which are children in the womb? I mean, how can anyone disagree with that logic? It just seems to be absolutely ironclad. So that's the way I see it.
I think that's a very interesting take on it, because 10 years or so ago, we'd have, in these sort of discussions, the pro-life consensus, I think, was to go for a rights-based conversation, a pastoral conversation certainly as well, but to seemingly avoid the religious baggage and not to talk about sacred, because it was thought, oh well, people don't necessarily understand what those concepts mean. But I think from what you're saying is, well, now we actually have to take a different turn on this and actually embrace the term, give it new life, give it oxygen, and push it forward, because people have an innate sense of that, particularly as society has become a less sacred space, a more technocratic space, a more digitalized space. Let's talk about sacred. And let's make this a heart-to-heart discussion.
I agree with that, and I think the sort of lowest common denominator argument is not a good one. I think we have to recognize that all politics and all political conversations are fundamentally religious in nature. It's a theological discussion fundamentally. It's what is the relationship of humanity to God, and what do you think about that? If you don't believe that, that human beings are sacred, made in the image of God, endowed with dignity which shouldn't be violated, then I think you can there are things you can do from a kind of presuppositionalist or sort of theological perspective, or sort of, how would you say, kind of a logical perspective, you could say, well, the implication of your view is that marginalized people or vulnerable people should be discarded if they're no longer of any use or whatever, and you could approach it from that angle. But I think it always needs to be trying to get to that theological reality, which is that human life is sacred and human beings are made in the image of God. And I think most people, especially in our culture, resonate with that idea, even if they're not explicitly Christian. So I think we do need that for sure. Speaking of which, Daniel, on Twitter, so a bit of controversy. There's a Twitter account called Our C of E Like, the name I've never understood, but basically you have a priest taking over it each week, I think it is, and then they talk about what their priestly weeks have been like. Now, apparently it was some kind of traditionalist Anglo-Catholic this week, and I'm assuming it was a man. He put a video up and said, "Rosary for the lives of the unborn being offered on the bus at March."
Yeah, it is a guy. Is known to one of my parishioners.
Oh, good. Well, good for him. And he put this up, and he wrote, "We have prayed for those who are considering abortion and for those who are deceived and believe it is a solution to poverty." Now, guess what, Daniel? Some priests in the Church of England and other sort of liberals did not like it. So it was surprise. Now I'm not casting aspersions here. I'm just merely reporting what was said. Alice Jolly, who is a parish priest at St. Benedict's in Cambridge, said there is a difference between sharing a snapshot of 1 week and irresponsibly using this platform to spread such egregious right-wing views. And here you go, Daniel, you've stirred the pot here where you've replied, "Can you please tell me why you, as a vicar, think that a video clip of Christians praying for the unborn and victims of abortion is wrong? Is right-wing. I'm baffled." And she wrote, "It's not the prayers, it's the busload of men on their way to scream in the faces of women during a march campaigning for an end to free legal access to abortion. I trust you know the COV's official position on this matter. I certainly do." And then you've written, "This is a very strange reply. I remain baffled. The assumptions and caricatures being insinuated. I think I'll leave it at that. Seems pointless to carry on." And then you say there's somebody else just talked about how you're blocked and so on. I replied and said, specifically to this thing about screaming in the faces of women, I wrote, "That didn't happen, Alice. I was there. The only people screaming were the Antifa counter-protesters who were showering the peaceful pro-lifers, men, women, and lots of children with diabolical epithets." And I have to say as well, this thing about men, I can see like the back of 3-4 men's heads, and then it looks like on the left there might be 2 women, but there were loads of women at the March for Life. There were loads and loads of women, like mothers, young single women, like carrying their placards, like really really bold in the face of these Antifa lunatics. It's inspiring to see these young women there who are standing up for the lives of the unborn. This characterization, I mean, so why would you say they're on their way to scream in the faces? Does she know this? Has she been to a March for Life? I can tell you it's nothing like that at all. And it's not an issue of campaigning to end free legal access to abortion. It's about saying that the lives of the unborn should be protected, and then there is another related though separate question about the legality of abortion and so on and so forth. But this is a complete mischaracterization of what was happening on the day. There were no women were having their faces. Where would these women even be? Or just sort of bystanders on the road who are just screaming in the faces of women. It was completely the other way around. It was the pro-life marchers were the ones who were being abused.
Talk about getting it wrong.
Well, a ridiculous tweet. And then I think there was more on this, wasn't there?
I think there probably was. I've lost track, to be honest. But
there was a further tweet about how because this is what these progressive liberals always do. They write something which is controversial, and then they get replies, and then they immediately write another post saying that they have been abused because people have disagreed with their post. And oh yeah, here it is. So nice to start Sunday morning with a backlog of men telling me I'm not a priest. Thank goodness for the block button. So she is doing lots of blocking. So anyway, so then it sort of carries on. But anyway, I think one of the sort of contentious points there as well is that I trust you know the C of E's official position. I think the C of E's official position is that abortion in the vast majority of cases is not morally justifiable, and they leave a small amount of room for abortion in cases where like the mother's life might be threatened. And then I don't know if there's some ambiguity around what the actual position is, but it's certainly not that it should be reflected like our current society's take on it is acceptable. Or I don't. Do you know about this, Daniel?
Yeah, I think when you say that, we've got to be careful because, in a sense, they're not necessarily speaking ex cathedra. Is the bishops having an agreed statement on it that they could, in the majority, sign up to, whereas you can argue that the deposit of faith, the Ten Commandments, the Scriptures, have a much tighter,
of course,
even of that. I'm always a bit dubious when somebody says the C of E says, because the C of E, as we know, is such a diverse body that we can easily be captured by an intern in Church House who puts out a policy statement on the hoof. And reflects nobody's view at all.
Yeah.
But, is just what that particular person thought others might like to hear.
Yeah, I thought it was important to respond to this because she's doing that, isn't she? She's sort of saying that the C of E's official position, and I was trying to find it because she's also saying that somewhere else she said the C of E does not campaign against abortion, as though, well, I don't really know where she's getting that from. Why does she get to say how people in the Church of England approach the issue of abortion? Well, we can't.
I mean, again, the Church of England is its people, not its governing body.
Yep.
So the C of E does campaign against abortion because even if you were the only Anglican there, you were there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course. And there were lots of Anglicans there, so they do. And as many people have pointed out, the earliest Christian explicit mention of abortion outside of Scripture is in the Didache from AD 70. There are two ways, one of life and one of death. You shall not murder a child by abortion or kill a newborn infant. And that's the oldest known Christian catechism. So I guess
we know the Romans loved their abortions.
They certainly did.
Infanticide.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that marked out the Christian church was the rescuing of children and the appropriate burial of those who had been aborted or killed at birth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the point being that the idea that the, let's call it pro-life position is somehow, outside the bounds of acceptability in the Church of England is somewhat questionable, let's say, to use a rhetorical understatement. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Daniel, before we do final email and a bit of a question to Rev, should we have a little listen to something? Oh, should we do this? Are we going to do this for something different? Let's have a little listen. So I actually did a tweet about this, and I got criticized, which I found amazing. But let's have a listen to a lady on TikTok who has gone viral. I don't actually know her name, but I know this was retweeted by Matt Walsh. So just for a little snapshot of where our culture is at. Here we go.
It's 10:45 a.m. on a Saturday. I am 29 and single.
Can you hear this, by the way? Is this coming through? Okay, Karen.
I don't have kids yet. Here's what your Saturday morning looks like when you're single at 29 and you don't have a kid running around the house. I didn't rise from my bed until 10:15. Every time I thought, I should probably get up and do something. I thought, why? Nobody's making me. I'm not missing out on anything. I went to Beyonce last night and I didn't get home until 1 a.m. And I danced and drank my little heart out. And I didn't pay a babysitter to watch my kids as I did that. And I woke up a tad hungover this morning, which is probably why I was in bed for so long. And I was just scrolling on my phone and I saw a picture of shakshuka and I thought, you know what sounds really good? Maybe I'm gonna learn how to make shakshuka today.
Do you know what shakshuka is, Daniel? If you come across it, I think it's like tomato, sort of spicy tomato sauce with eggs in it. You can make it with sausage meat in the tomato sauce as well, which is actually really, really nice. So, but it's not that complicated. That's one thing I would say. I mean, she sort of say, "Oh, I'm going to sort of master this and stuff." It's very, very easy, very easy. It won't take you the whole day.
I have no plans and I don't have kids and I don't have a husband and I don't have errands to run. I can go to the grocery store and learn how to make shakshuka. So that's on my agenda today.
She should read it in a recipe book. Don't go to the grocery store to learn. You go to the grocery store to buy the ingredients. You see, there's different.
Also on my agenda, probably a rewatch of some Real Housewives of New York. I'm also doing a rewatch of Normal People on Hulu, which is really spicy and I highly recommend. Weirdly, I'm into this documentary on Netflix about blue zone countries, so I've got a pretty stacked day. Anyway, I say all this to say, whenever I'm hard on myself about why I'm not married and I don't have kids and I should be further along at 29, almost 30, I wouldn't want to do anything else this Saturday. And I know that you can do all these things when you have kids and you're married, and I understand.
You can't do all those things when you can't be simultaneously watching 3 different box sets. Just putting that in there.
But the effortlessness and ease of my life, just kind of focusing on myself and the shakshuka I want to make or the Beyonce concert I want to go to, really pays off when I'm hard on myself for not being where society tells me I should be in life.
A number of people have pointed out that society doesn't really tell her she shouldn't be in this place in her life, but actually would commend her for her decisions. So it's kind of interestingly framed in terms of, well, I'm being sort of radically countercultural by not being married when I'm 29 and not having any kids. But isn't that exactly what the culture tells you to do? Not get married, focus on your career, go to a Beyonce concert, watch TV, scroll on your phone, make shakshuka with your Saturday afternoon. You know, it's kind of I don't know. What's your take, Daniel?
I got this image in my head of Edvard Munch's The Scream.
Oh yeah. I know.
You know,
Yeah.
that God bless her. At some point in her life, in a way, I hope she will. She'll come to that precipice of, oh my God, what have I done?
Yeah.
Where am I? Where am I going? Why am I so dissatisfied with everything? You know, that if you'd have recorded an interview with this person maybe 100 years, someone like this 100 years ago, you know, I suspect you'd have had a more heroic story. You know, I'm single, so I'm going to travel the world, educate myself. I'm going to, you know, roll up my sleeves and work in a field hospital.
Yeah.
I'm going to make the best possible version of myself to help others. You know, and we know that, you know, on the other side of the gender, there would have been chaps who'd have said, you know, I'm not married, so I'm able to, for instance, go to war and serve my country in perhaps a more dynamic way that a married man can't. Because I owe something to the society and civilization and country that has given me all these benefits. And what I hear from this sad soul is someone who thinks that life is simply about taking and, you know, gorging on happiness and their own dopamine. They're in a sort of spiritual doom scrolling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way I felt was just sort of sad. It was almost like she was trying to convince herself that her life was good, but her life just lacks any sort of sense of meaning. And you need meaning, don't you, in life in order to really be happy. So even if she does have these things, I can't really imagine that she's, they're not going to fulfill her in a kind of deep down way. And even if she thinks they do, that's only, well, even if they do for a time, let's say, it's not gonna last. And she's just she's sort of investing in making herself the most kind of shallow, superficial person you can possibly imagine. And she's not even reading books. But if I didn't have any responsibility, I didn't have any kids and I wasn't married and I had loads of free time, I'd at least read books. I'd read novels, because I really like reading and I like learning and stuff like that. But it's not even like I'm going to learn something. The only thing she wants to learn is how to make shakshuka. And that's really easy. That will take you like 5 minutes if you're not a complete moron. So, she's not even learning anything. But as you can imagine, Daniel, I retweeted it and I said, look, this might sound a bit harsh now, I don't know, but I wrote, this is really sad. Prayers for this woman who may have shakshuka, but she has no soul. And, people, a number of, I have to say, they look like clergy women who seem to be the demographic who object when this does happen. When this
You're
does
on the
happen,
hate list.
It tends to be them. But they seem to have taken that somewhat literally, right? So they're sort of saying, what do you mean she's got no soul? So this person says, how can we judge? No soul. Her choices are different, maybe, to yours and mine. She's actually written yours in mine. I don't think she means that. But this is only a tiny snippet of all her life is. So many choose a child-free life. I think the point she's making might be that she has challenges with society accepting who she chooses to be. And Ian Paul actually replied to that and wrote, a narrative based on, I have no obligations to anyone else, so I can just do what I want, is hardly a challenge to contemporary culture. And I wrote, exactly. I wonder if Sarah, this woman, would have the same attitude towards me if I revealed my outlook on life to her. She hasn't replied to that. And then there's another lady she's lady, she's great. Her name, so, on Twitter profiles when somebody wants to like signpost something to you. So her name is on Twitter, Dr. Penelope Caldo. And her Twitter profile picture is literally a picture of her back with her doctoral hood on. So just to be clear, she's got a doctoral degree. Okay. So this is one smart cookie we're dealing with here. This is somebody with a doctorate. Okay. Dr. Penelope. That's doctor, even on Twitter. Even on Twitter, it's doctor. All right. So, and she's written, what? With an exclamation mark. It's like, what? Because she's single and is having a normal Saturday off? That's outrageous. She's single. What? Because she's single and it's having a normal Saturday. This is just a normal Saturday, Daniel. This is a completely normal Saturday. A day completely devoid of any human contact. A day on which no other human beings are spoken of, and the only possible consideration is watching 3 box sets and making shakshuka and getting up. It didn't even sound like she'd been with anyone at the Beyonce concert. She just said, I was at a Beyonce concert. She didn't even say I'd been there with friends. I mean, just on a pastoral level, I'd be concerned if I knew that somebody I was caring for in some way was going to a Beyonce concert by herself and getting drunk and then waking up with a hangover. And then she had nothing to do except for make shakshuka. I'd be concerned. I'd be saying to her, look, you need friends. And because this thing is like, even friendship is an obligation, isn't it? Like friendship is, it's a two-way street. You actually need to give something to be a friend to someone. You have to give your time and you have to care about that person in order to be so it's not normal, this kind of thing at all. So thank you, Dr. Penelope Cal.
But if the culture is all about me and my choice.
Yes.
And this sort of religion of the self, and there are people within the Church of England, ministers who think, we've got to appease this. We've got to kind of cozy up to this, that life is just an endless buffet of choices and affirmations. If that's the sum of it, then Lord, that's pretty depressing, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
How is that kind of person going to react when something monumental happens, societal or personal? is their vision of their life like in Huxley's Brave New World, that in their riper years they will walk to the happy death center?
Yeah. Well,
where they'll be evaporated and completely forgotten about.
Yeah, well, she could just end her life in one of those suicide pods, couldn't she? Once she's had enough of making shakshuka or whatever is recommended in the BBC, good food guide, and she's watched all the box sets, she could just think, well, I'm going to decline into old age, and so I'll just go in a suicide pod now. And I know that sounds sort of flippant, but that is genuinely the way I think some people probably think. It's like, well, life is about pleasure. I'll take what I can, and then when I start to decline, I'll just kill myself, because it kind of follows logically, doesn't it? And it reminds me.
I reread on holiday C.S. Lewis's Discarded Image.
Oh yeah, it's great.
One of the things he says is that we misinterpret the medievals. The medievals were very curious as a people and very bookish, more so than we think. Even though they were bookish, though there weren't many books.
Yes,
and their culture was geared towards that incredible sense of curiosity and imagination. And sometimes they got it wrong. Sometimes they got it more right than we might like to admit. And I think, if you took Sarah back 500 years in the TARDIS and plonked her in medieval Shropshire, I think these people would think, who is this moron who lacks such curiosity and imagination, who is spiritually so flat? What's gone wrong with them? In the Inferno, one of the sins is that kind of despondency, and people have maligned Dante for saying, oh, he's put depressed people in hell, but actually he's putting those who have actively chosen a pointless life.
Yeah, those are people who are driven around by like a powerful wind, aren't they? I think.
Yeah.
Rightly. Yeah.
And they flit from thing to thing. They're the medieval doom scrollers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just driven about from
one choice to another, from one sort of
by like passion, by trends in society, and so on. So they're just kind of moved around. That's why Dante has those kind of poetic, the punishments are like poetic justice, aren't they? To sort of be tormented by a wind that pushes you around and sort of makes you fly around.
And you just think, Sarah, are you not curious? I can't get my head around someone not having that insatiable desire for knowledge and for truth. I just can't get my head around it. Why wouldn't you be? Why wouldn't you want to not know? What is it that's so terrifying about the world epistemologically that you would think, I'd rather just sit in a box watching the telly and having the occasional glass of wine with friends and go to a concert and not be curious about how I might live my life as a married person, or as working in Bengali as a charity worker, or
having children,
having children, doing something having some direction in my life.
Yeah, there's also a kind of principle in terms of just without even talking about it in Christian terms or religious terms, that things are more enjoyable when they are delayed and when you have less of them, right? And you can obviously take that principle to an extreme, but if you only drink wine once a week, then it's far more enjoyable than drinking it every single mealtime. So if you're always living a life of pleasure sort of becomes boring, so there's even that. It reminds me of the scripture when Jesus talks about, this is just in my mind because I was preaching on it last week, but when he says he who seeks to save his life will lose it. I was thinking about that a lot, and I think it must mean something like this. It's like, if you just stack up things without any kind of thought of God and of eternity and of cultivating your own soul, then you are ultimately going to end up with nothing, and that's the sad reality. I mean, let's hope this woman, finds Christ.
And that Greek translation is psyche. It's lose your psyche, actually disintegrate within yourself. And you began by saying your reply was about, I think Sarah doesn't have a soul anymore.
Exactly.
There's no animating in the old sense of the word. There's nothing animating, that's collecting her together, that's giving her direction and push.
Yeah. And I didn't
She's
mean,
just
like
an avatar.
Yeah. And when I said no soul, I didn't mean like literally her soul has disappeared. But if you think about the words of Christ in that passage, when he says, what will it gain a man if he, what will it profit a man if he gain the world though lose his soul? For what can a man give in exchange for his soul? He's not talking about it like as a kind of binary thing, as in like you have a soul or you don't. It's like you cultivate your soul, you make it something real and meaningful and profound and great within you, and or not. And you, that's a choice. You can become a magnanimous person, which is, literally magnanimous has kind of connotations of being big, being large and weighty and significant, or you become a small, insignificant, kind of puny and irrelevant person. And that's the point here, is that if you just do this with your life, that's what you're going to become.
If your eye is in darkness, what darkness indeed it is. Yes, Sermon on the Mount, isn't it? That the Greeks and the Semitic people had the sense of the spiritual eye, what you open yourself to, what you let in. And if there's no discipline, if you're just an empty vessel.
Amen.
You are intensely diminished.
Of course. Daniel, we're going to have to move on because I want to finish in about just under 15 minutes would be really good. So good. Just before we move on to our final encouraging email and a question of the Rev, just to say, please do think about supporting this podcast. We rely upon the listeners' support. We don't do adverts or anything like that, but we do need your support to cover the cost of this episode and also to help me live and to help us do other things like buy merchandise and things like that. So if you want to do all of those things, then please go to irreverentpod.com and consider becoming a Patreon today. Click on the big red button. You can get the episodes early. You can get our special bonus audio podcast, which is called Uncollared, where we chat about other things, which don't come up in the podcast. And I think it's a very interesting podcast. It's only short, but it's a little snippet of our lives. And you can do all this for as little as £1.50 plus VAT in the UK per month. £1.50 per month. It's nothing. It's so little, but it makes such a big difference to us. So please do consider becoming a patron. Go to irreverentpod.com and click on the big red button. I don't get paid by my church. I just have a house and I make my income online largely. So please do consider doing that. Really, really appreciate that. Or you can buy us a coffee. It's in the same place, irreverentpod.com. Click on the big yellow button, buy us a virtual coffee, or a metaphorical coffee, and leave us a nice encouraging message. And by the way, if anyone has any encouraging stories about stuff they've been seeing in their lives, in the church, or people becoming Christians, send them to us at reverendpod@gmail.com. We really appreciate that. But do support the podcast. We rely on your support, and we really appreciate that. £1.50 per month is not very much. If you can give more, fantastic. Go to the website and do that, please. Right, final encouraging email, Daniel. Hi, this is Andrew. I've recently discovered your podcast over the last few days and wanted to thank you for the hard work and intellectual content of these. I'm in my 40s and was raised an Anglican, being baptized, confirmed, and attending a church school. Like many people, I lapsed during my teens and 20s and returned to the faith over the last few years after finding modern life empty and devoid of meaning. I'm generally a conservative/orthodox believer and despair of the world sometimes, especially with the current obsession with identity politics. It is refreshing to hear people with similar thoughts and opinions to me. I listen to similar style podcasts, but most are based in the USA. So it's great to hear one based in the UK. I discovered you whilst listening to your interview with Calvin Robinson, who is another contemporary I also enjoy listening to too. I live in a small village and have started to attend church again. I particularly enjoy going to the 8 a.m. service, as that I find is the most peaceful and simple service and soothes my soul. Thanks again. Keep up the good work. Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. That is a brilliant email. And of course, we love hearing things like that. And we wish you all the best. So
we're getting these fantastic stories nearly daily coming through, and here we are. 3 vicars with
laptops,
a webcam each, not multi-millions. And it's a great privilege to be able to hear those fantastic stories. And it's a shame that we're, I think, potentially the only podcast doing this in the UK. But it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful to. It's been a fantastic privilege in my life the last two odd years to daily hear these stories in an environment where normally the narrative is of decline.
Yes, amen. It doesn't have to be that way. It's not in decline everywhere. It might be in decline overall, but it's not in decline everywhere.
And tap, 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 dear Church of England bosses, there are lots of people like Andrew who are having these stories. This is every day. This is coming to me, Jamie, and Tom. Why aren't you listening to these people?
Yep.
Why are you not engaging with them? Please engage with them.
Amen.
There's someone out there listening, for goodness sake, because these people want church.
Yeah. Good questions, Daniel. Good questions. And we don't, what we can do is we can speak when we're given the opportunity. Like I was asked to be on Radio 4 this week, which I've, never been on sort of national radio or anything before, only very, very briefly. But bishops and others have their voices are amplified. And I think they really need to start paying attention to these things that, it's not only us, it's not, other people are tapping into it in a much bigger way than we are.
Yeah. And I know, we've had the label rascals, that we are rascally voices.
I think it was specifically you, Daniel.
Yeah, that we're somehow, anti-Church of England, that we're on our way out. I think, bishops and others, please listen to us. I can't but underline this. Jamie, myself, and Tom are every week encouraging people to go to church. And we're sometimes getting quite a lot of kickback from that, from folks say, well, I go to church and the vicar rolls his eyes or gives me pushback because my concerns are different to his. My sense of the world is not as progressive. We are telling people, attend your church, local if possible. Encourage one another into fellowship and the breaking of the bread, the Eucharist. Come to the sacraments, get baptized if you're not baptized. We are not in any ways, it would be so easy to caricature what we're doing here and have been doing for 2 years in Irreverent as somehow some back-ended dissident group within the Church of England trying to put people off Christianity for our own egos. Fantastic. Andrew is one of many stories that we receive each week.
Yes.
In the face of supposed decline.
Yes, indeed. It doesn't have to be this way. It really doesn't. Yep. Daniel, it's time for this. Here we go. I had it ready this week. Oh, turn it down too much. Not a professional. Right, here we go. It's time for Question the Rev with our wonderful theme tune composed and recorded by Vaughan, who's another legend. I'm using the word legend now, partly to wind people up, because I found this kind of thing where a lot of people they don't like it when we use colloquial speech. They think we should use more formal speech, and I kind of mean it in an ironic way, Daniel, because I never use the word legend in my ordinary life, but I'm going to do it just to wind people up. So if you tell me not to use a word on the podcast or to use a specific phrase, there's always a chance that might just make me do it more. So just saying, I don't want to be petulant. Anyway, here we go. It's completely different. Dear Daniel, Tom and Jamie, I'm really interested to hear your views on how we should apply the fourth commandment about the Sabbath as New Testament Christians. Most Christians I know are conservative evangelicals, and the emphasis is on going to church on Sunday, but not being Puritan, in inverted commas, about it. Because Jesus said the Sabbath is for us and not the other way around. However, it troubles me that we Christians happily shop, eat out, catch public transport, go to the cinema, meet for a coffee, etc. on a Sunday without considering how our actions are fueling Sunday employment and this making it harder for people to go to church. I've started to feel we should make more of a stand. What are your views? Where would you draw the line for Sunday activity? I know jobs for certain people like paramedics, midwives and vicars have to happen on Sundays. Yeah, they do. But should we avoid supporting Sunday employment in all cases where it isn't necessary, or just accept people choose to work an extra day a week to make ends meet, and boycotting Sunday trading won't make any difference? I'm interested in your views. I love the podcast and value your wisdom. Thank you very much, Louisa.
I was really disappointed in the late 1980s when the Sunday Trading Act was enacted. I think I, as a rather precocious, what would I have been, sort of 15, 16-year-old, I got a feeling I wrote to my member of parliament, or even to Mrs. Thatcher, to say that I thought that this was some sort of national apostasy.
Yeah. And it's amazing that that happened under Thatcher, isn't it? It really, let's think about it. The supposed stalwart of conservatism, that happened under Thatcher. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I remember being truly disgusted by it. And as I had this renewal of faith at 17, I think really up till about my 30s, I was hyper strict,
right,
about it. And not that being showy, but there was a whole load of boundaries of what I would and wouldn't do. And I remember my first weekend at university shocking friends by putting on a suit and walking to church.
Nice.
I think I went to Canterbury Cathedral, actually.
I was going to ask where you went.
And walked from King's College down the hill,
nice.
In a suit and tie. And friends were like, what the effing hell are you doing?
What are you doing, man? What are you doing, man? Oh, why are you going down the hill in the suit?
And I was like,
that kind of stuff.
You got a job interview? I said something precocious, yes, with Jesus Christ.
I have a job interview for the post of Fisher of Man.
Yes.
Or Fisher of Men, probably. Sorry.
And that was it. That was part of my life. I think I probably got a lot laxer subsequently, and it troubles me. And I think, why are we doing? I mean, at times I think that there might be something to be said for a cultural movement which said we should have, for instance, a digital Sabbath on Sundays. We should put down the phones, folks. Put down the screens, play board games, just talk to each other. My grandfather, who brought me up in the East End, he was I think they call it a Goyim boy. Where you got paid a shilling on Shabbat to go to Jewish homes and light the candles.
No, because they can't
to switch the lights on and off. To do the and he actually loved it, and he thought it was a fantastic. He was really haunted by the whole experience of it, and thought that this was such a fabulous witness, and so culturally different. But my family returned to church rather late in life, so that was like when I was in my sort of mid-teens, we started going to church afresh. But even then, Sundays in the 1980s, until that law came in, was very, very quiet. I mean, you'd be lucky if a garden centre was open, and newsagents only opened up for like a couple hours on a Sunday morning to sell the newspapers and then closed up. It was rather lovely. I can remember at one point as a student, I must have been 18, walking through London, Oxford Street, and it's completely closed on a Sunday. And it was such an incredibly wonderful feeling of, your voice echoing up and down the street. So we don't have that. We don't have that now. But, personally, I put my hand up as a hypocrite that I'm probably not, I've gone to the cinema on Sundays and gone to restaurants and what have you. But I think, like I was saying at the beginning about this, Sunday best, perhaps there is something to be thought through and revived here. So it's good to have a question that puts us on the hop. My wife and I thought years ago of going and live, instead of coming to Salcombe, we were very tempted to go off grid to like the islands, the Western Isles, whatever, where the Sabbath is major. Even now, you don't hang up your washing on a Sunday. There are no shops open. I think they had a big to-do about 10 years ago when they voted as a community to allow the ferry to come in.
Right.
with tourists.
Yeah.
But there's nothing much for the tourists to do except walk around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's maybe something that we should all perhaps, a small Orthodox Christians, I think, need to come back to. I think Roman Catholics are pretty bad at this, actually.
Really?
With the greatest respect, as a tradition that's generally fairly pointed on the crossing the dots and crossing the T's and dotting the I's on the law, that they're quite prescriptive, that the Sabbath is not something that, apart from attending church on Sunday, it's a very minimalist view of the Sabbath. And I think that's a shame, actually. I think that there would be something for a future pope making some edict saying, thou shalt not work on the Sunday.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not do X, Y, and Z in the context of the 21st century.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about Sunday trading laws is a really good example of how politics is fundamentally theological in nature, because whether or not you have Sunday trading laws reflects the faith or not of a nation. And I think that is the moment you mentioned. I think that's an extremely significant moment for us culturally when we did away with the Sabbath, Sunday trading laws or whatever you want to call it. But essentially, it's a doing away of the Sabbath. And there's something about the Sabbath which I think marks a culture out as distinctively Christian. And I have to say, I think it marks out a life as distinctively Christian as well, because work and money and commerce and toil, it is an idol which needs to be put in its place. And there's so much profundity when you start thinking about the Sabbath. I've just started recently thinking about it. I've been reading a book by a Jewish writer called Abraham Heschel, which is called The Sabbath, which is a really interesting book, not a Christian, but still has some really interesting things to say. But I'd be absolutely in favor of bringing back Sunday trading laws and ceasing all economic activities on Sundays. If I was elected prime minister, that's the first thing I'd do. I wouldn't force people to go to church, but I'd make it so that the church was basically the only thing happening on Sundays, and economic activity.
That'd be so cool.
It would be amazing. Can you imagine what would happen to our culture if that happened? Can you imagine how many more people would go to church if the only thing that there was to do was to go to church? And this is why, I just repeat this point. Politics is theological. It's fundamentally theological. It's about what your values are, from lesser, more innocuous values to your ultimate values. And if you're a Christian nation, you promote Christianity, and one of the ways you promote Christianity is by Sabbath laws. Having said that, this question's made me think about I think what I've been doing for many years, because I've been involved in ministries, thinking, well, Sundays are kind of like a working day.
Yeah, I've tried not to think about it in that way. So,
well, maybe I shouldn't. But what it's made me do, I haven't thought about the, Sabbath as resistance thing, resisting the capitalist, the sort of devouring marketplace, which sort of takes absolutely everything, including the Sabbath day. But maybe I should just ban economic transactions on Sundays. I'm open to it. I'll do it.
I think it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And two briefings come to mind. One, in my last parish, I knew a couple of parishioners who worked in supermarkets as practicing Christians, and if you did not sign up to working on a Sunday, you were punished.
Yeah,
and that included that you got to be the person who did the toilets.
Really?
You got the crappy jobs.
Yeah.
You never got promoted. And this friend of mine said, I take it as an honor.
Amazing.
That I'm cleaning the loos, and I know I've been punished because I won't work on Sunday because of this. And I thought, gosh, that's, what an extraordinary position to take. How inspiring is that? And I think on the Sunday, when people say, oh, Vicar, it's the only day you work, I rebuttal that and say I don't work on a Sunday. I would be, as a Christian man, father, coming to church anyway. What I try not to do for Sunday is I try to make the afternoon family orientated. so that after Sunday worship, which is normally just in the morning, the rest of the day is not, I'm not at my desk. We are doing family stuff. And yes, hand up, that might include going to, bowling or going to the cinema or whatever, but it is a family invested time. And all the preparations, my work during the week is for me to be able to come on Sunday and feel that the morning is, as near as I can make it, my Shabbat. Now, that's different from a day off, because you and I need the equivalent, I suppose, of a Saturday. We need a day where we can sort our personal stuff out, maybe do some, go to the gym or go for a swim, just be able to switch off and get away from the cabin fever that can be parochial life. But I try in my ministry to keep Sunday as a Shabbat, Sabbath.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I think the other thing that is a good point that this person raises here is about considering other people, and the way that, if you make economic transactions on a Sunday, you are essentially supporting a system that keeps people work on Sundays. And it's not, one sort of assumes in our culture that most of those people are not Christians, but even so, if you want to be consistent about it, if you want to say to people you shouldn't work on Sundays, well, then we also should say, well, I'm not going to fund work on Sundays. In that case, if I'm not going to support working on Sunday, I shouldn't support it in any way, whether that's in word or in deed. So I think there's an interesting point there as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's an interesting question. We actually, just one final thing on this, we actually started having a Sabbath day not on Sunday, because in trying to do that when we can. A lot of the time on Saturday, if not Saturday, then another day, because my working week is quite flexible. But that is hugely beneficial, just in terms of switching off the phone, not going on the internet, intentionally spending time with family, not buying stuff, not making economic transactions. That it does something to your soul, when you're completely switched off from that world, and you can just enjoy. I'm not sort of highly legalistic about it. Sometimes I watch some football or whatever, but just enjoy the world. Go for a walk, enjoy the sunshine, listen to the birds singing, spend time with each other, play games. Just switch off from the system. I think that's a really good thing to do. But then again, there is something which I think this highlighted by this piece is, that there is something about Sunday that we need to contend for corporately. Even if you can have a sort of Sabbath day on another day, we still need to contend for that Sunday corporately. So really good email, really good. Daniel, we have to finish. Now, Daniel, have you got some prayer that you can do for us? Have you got a prayer you can do?
Yeah,
Daniel?
I'll do the collect for last Sunday. Let us pray. Almighty God, who called your holy church to bear witness that you were in Christ reconciling the world to yourself, help us to proclaim the good news of your love, that all who hear it may be drawn to you, through who was lifted up on the cross and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Lovely, Daniel. And now we say thank you to everyone for listening. Do support the show if you can at irreverendpod.com. We'd really appreciate that. Become a Patreon now, today. But if you can't do that, it's no problem. We need to remember, what is I say keep watch and you say keep the faith. Do you know about this? There's sign off.
No.
Okay, so the sign off now, I think Tom and I decided, is I say until next time, keep watch, and then you say keep the faith. Okay, so is that right? You got your line, keep the faith. Okay, so thanks everyone for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And until next time, keep watch.
Keep the faith.